Okay, well, good evening, everybody. It's a great pleasure to welcome just so many of you here tonight, especially on such a wet evening. I'll just introduce myself. I'm Mark Ormerod, Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Provost here at Keele. And I'd particularly like to welcome some people who've travelled quite a long way to be here today from outside the university, both friends and professional colleagues of Zoe's. So just for those who might not have been to inaugural lecture before, they are an opportunity for the new professor to talk about their area of expertise and also for us to show profile of research at Keele and also in the discipline, in this case in the environment and sustainability area. And tonight is a particular pleasure to be able to welcome and introduce this evening's inaugural Zoe Robinson from the School of Geography, Geology and Environment. And particular pleasure because I was Zoe's head of school in the then School of Physical and Geographical Sciences for 6 years, from 2005 to 2011. And it is probably a time to embarrass people a little bit. And so, I mean, Zoe was just, when I first kind of became head of that merged school, just a fantastic, dynamic and highly innovative and inspiring colleague. And I think she has continued to be that over the whole time that I've known her at Keele since my roles changed, and also you can see the trajectory of Zoe's career has also shown that. So just as a bit of a biography, Zoe is a Keele success story. She obtained a BSc in Geography and Geology from Keele back in 1999. There is a backstory to that it was by accident, having started on a different degree route at a different university, and she could have been a famous actress by now, but actually she is actually a starring role in environmental sciences instead. So in 2003, Zoe was awarded a PhD in geochemistry and the behaviour of glacial groundwater systems in Iceland. That was from Keele. It's a great pleasure to have Ian Fairchild here tonight, Zoe's supervisor, to kind of listen to how Zoe's developed since then. Zoe, after finishing her PhD, spent a year working as a geologist and hydrogeologist in environmental consultancy before, in 2004, she was appointed to a lectureship in physical geography at Keele. And so it was during that time when I sort of really got to know Zoe, when we merged the then School of Chemistry and Physics with School of Earth Science and Geography to form the new school. In 2009, she was promoted to Senior Lecturer in Environmental Science in Geography, and then in 2015 promoted to a Reader in Sustainability in Geography before being promoted to Professor in January 2019. 2010, Zoe gained an MA in Learning and Teaching in Higher Education, and then she was awarded a National Teaching Fellowship in 2012 for her genuinely nationally leading work around employability and education for sustainability. In 2015, she became one of the first people at Keele to get a Principal Fellowship from the Higher Education Academy for her leadership of the Education for Sustainability agenda. And last year, she was shortlisted and came incredibly close to winning Most Innovative Teacher of the Year at the Times Higher Awards. We don't hold that against them, but it was very close. And the fact that she was shortlisted and identified as a runner-up says everything about the innovation in her teaching. In 2012, we created a new role in the university as Director of Education for Sustainability, and Zoe took on that, spending 30% of her time, probably a lot more, 30% of Zoe's time is a lot of time, I should say. I really kind of led the way in terms of Keele being nationally leading around the agenda for embedding sustainability across all our courses, whether that's in the health faculty, the science faculty, or in humanities and social sciences. And then latterly, she became co-director of the Institute for Sustainable Futures and played a really pivotal role in both conceiving and designing that. I think alongside all of that activity, being an outstanding and highly innovative educator, Zoe's also continued to grow and expand her research profile across a really broad range of things, including most recently the Innovate UK award that we got with Auntie about creating smart local energy systems in Rugeley. And she has throughout her time secured external funding from a wide variety of sources. She's also done a huge amount of public engagement work. Has a wide variety of external roles, which I'm not going to talk about, but I will just say a little bit about some of Zoe's external activities, because despite doing everything she does do, she's also a qualified mountain leader, black belt in Taekwondo, so bear that in mind when you ask any questions at the end. Advanced Performance Sea Kayak Coach, one of only 4 women in the UK to be so. And last year, for the fun of it, she sea kayaked around the whole of Ireland. So, can I formally welcome Zoe Robinson, Professor of Sustainability in Higher Education, and invite her to present her inaugural lecture, Response and Responsibility, Universities as Actors for a More Sustainable Future.
Thank you very much. That's all actually quite embarrassing and really bizarre to see such a range of different bits of my life in the same room. Just a tiny bit like getting married, but I get to say more. So, okay, so this is sort of roughly what I'm going to talk about. And obviously the first thing I did was to Google, what do you do with an inaugural lecture? And I'm allowed to sort of talk about myself. And so there is a bit of sort of navel gazing, as you'll see from some of this. My first question is, what am I? But then really I'll sort of go through thinking a bit about some of the sort of theory and the background around sort of universities for their role in a more sustainable future. And then look at sort of some of the more practical sort of elements of what can universities actually do, and really drawing on sort of case studies of largely what we've done here, before going on to look at what's next. So the first question is what am I, not who am I? And within sort of the university world, people very much identify by their discipline. And I really struggle with that in terms of what sort of discipline do I say that I am. And that's partly because I've done a really wide sort of range of things, but with a core theme, as we'll see. So my background was digging holes in Iceland, walking through the snow with lots of equipment. But then I started to do quite a lot of public engagement work around sort of climate change. And then actually more recently starting to do work with sort of looking at consumer engagement around sort of new energy technologies and lots of things in between. So quite a range, and drawing on quite a range of different disciplines. And so that's why I identify as a sustainability scientist. And I'll say a bit more about what that means. But equally important for me is, I suppose Mark sort of introduced sort of inaugural lectures about being about sort of research. But being a researcher is really, for me, only one part of my identity. And actually, being an educator is important, but equally important is being a practitioner and actually trying to do things and actually make positive change as well. So your first question, having identified as a sustainability scientist, might well be, well, what actually is sustainability science? And it is a new sort of emerging field. And I'll use other people's words. They're normally better than mine to describe it. So a new field of sustainability science is emerging that seeks to understand the fundamental character of interactions between nature and society. So those interactions between nature and society are a key element. Then such an understanding must encompass the interaction of global processes with the ecological and social characteristics of particular places and sectors. So the elements of sort of linking and working between the natural and social sciences. And then to draw on another quotation, quite like this one, saying that sustainability science, like agricultural science and health science, sustainability science is a field defined by the problems it addresses rather than by the disciplines it employs. And that's great, because it means that I don't have to worry about disciplines and we can draw together lots of different sort of angles, but actually at the core of it is thinking about the challenges that we're facing and we're trying to tackle, and really sort of looking at that broad sustainability field. So the next obvious question then is what do we mean by sustainability? And as someone who's sort of worked in this field sort of all of my career, I have to say we're really lazy, because sustainability is a rubbish word that doesn't really mean anything. But we use it as a shorthand, and I'm going to use sustainability and sustainable development interchangeably here. Apologies for some people who might want to argue about that. And I'll just draw on the classic sort of Brundtland definition from 1987, saying sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And so very much has that future-facing element, thinking about what we do now and how that will impact the future. I would add into that definition specific reference to also thinking about how it impacts our natural ecosystems and environment as well. Now, back in 2015, the United Nations ratified the Sustainable Development Goals. So 17 different goals, 169 different targets. And for me, it became really easy to talk about what do we mean by sustainability. Well, this is it, pretty much. And it highlights the breadth of the different elements which feed into thinking about sustainability. So it's not just environmental issues. But equally important is we shouldn't look at each of these in isolation because they are all interconnected. And I suppose that's something which is sort of really typified sort of the way I like to sort of work is really thinking about sort of interactions and how everything sort of connects. So inevitably, being promoted to professor, you get asked, so what do you want to be professor of? And I realised that professor of cunning wasn't going to be an option, Blackadder reference there, but nor was a professor of sustainability stuff. So after much sort of navel gazing, thinking about what have I actually done, where is my so-called expertise, really, the thing that brings it all together is this sort of role of universities in sustainability, hence a professor of sustainability in higher education. Probably the only one in the country. Don't know if that's a good thing or not. Okay, so there's a bit of sort of background. Let's have a look now at this idea of, what responsibility do universities have for sustainability? Is this something that we can just ignore in university? Should we be taking a leadership role? Well, I would say that I have littered the presentation with gratuitous pictures from my other life as well. Okay, so this isn't a new area. It might feel as though the world has sort of changed. It certainly does for me around the sustainability agenda. But actually, people have been trying to sort of drive this forward and from sort of big organisations for a good number of years. So I'm going to go back just as far as 2005, which is really sort of around my entry point into the field. And at that time, the Higher Education Funding Council for England, they put out a consultation report called Sustainable Development in Higher Education. And in that report, they said that the greatest contribution education has to make to sustainable development is by enabling students to develop new skills and knowledge. So really highlighting the importance in terms of the educational mission of universities in driving sustainable development. Now, it's fair to say when that consultation was sort of put out, it wasn't received well in all parts of the country. And this is one of my favourite quotes. The hefty circular and sustainable development is one of the most pernicious and dangerous circulars ever to be issued. The issue here is not whether it's sustainable development is a good or bad idea. It is about the basic rights and responsibilities of universities and the need to safeguard academic freedom. It is not the job of universities to promote a particular political orthodoxy. It is their role to educate students to examine critically policies, ideas, concepts, and systems, then to make up their own minds. So, that actually caused HEFGE to roll back on a lot of their sort of ambitions, particularly around the educational mission for universities. And that sort of idea is certainly one that I've encountered throughout my career. And again, I don't want to sort of go into this debate at this point, but can do later, is we don't exist in a political vacuum in our current educational system sort of anyway, which this quote really seems to suggest. But HEFGE, funding universities, they continue to sort of drive on, particularly driven by one individual in HEFGE, driving forward this idea. And they produce sort of further sort of updates in their guidance. And in 2009, so 11 years ago, they said, within the next 10 years, the higher education sector in this country will be recognised as a major contributor to society's efforts to achieve sustainability. Now, we won't take a poll to see whether people think that that's been achieved in that 10 years, because actually the other thing I want to really sort of draw attention to is how they sort of saw all of the different ways that universities can contribute to sustainability through its skills and knowledge that its graduates learn and put into practice, its research and exchange of knowledge through business, community, public policy engagement, and through its own strategies and operations. And actually back in the 1990s, a lot of the talk around sustainability in higher education, it was all about the strategies and operations. So this is actually quite important in terms of moving that debate forward in terms of how the wider missions of a university are also very important in terms of driving forward sustainability. But things have changed. The past 9-12 months feels very, very different. And for someone who sort of spent their career working in these areas, sort of feeling as though you're standing in the wings, sort of on the fringes, going, this is important, maybe we should do something about this. Suddenly, everyone's talking the language of sustainability. And it really starts to feel as though we might be at a tipping point. And that's every time I turn on Radio 4, which is a lot, and not just to listen to the Archers. Climate change, sustainability is being talked about. And so this is sort of what we're hearing now, this language of a climate emergency, talk of businesses really embracing the sustainable development goals. And also discussion in the mainstream media about actually the role of universities in this agenda. So whenever there's a problem, people tend to very glibly sort of say, education's the answer. That's all right, we'll just educate people, tell people. But is it? Because actually, we're just educating people in a way that just fits into the same unsustainable systems. And as David Orr in this quote sort of puts it very nicely, he said, "It is worth noting that the destruction of the planet is not the work of ignorant people, rather it is largely the results of work of people by people with BAs, BScs, etc. Education can equip people to be more effective vandals of the earth. If one listens carefully, it may even be possible to hear the creation groan every year in late May when another batch of smart degree-holding but ecologically illiterate Homo sapiens who are eager to succeed are launched into the biosphere." So very much making the case that, education as it is not the answer. We're just perpetuating what we know is unsustainable. So we need to think about how we can do education in a different way. And this really leads us onto the field of education for sustainable development, and the field that I've very much been working in throughout my time. So this is one quote sort of to explain, to try and define what education for sustainable development is. So it's the process of equipping students with the knowledge and understanding, skills and attributes needed to work and live in a way that safeguards environmental, social and economic well-being, both in the present and for future generations. Now, actually, it is a bit more than that, as we'll see. But this is this guidance document published in 2014 is something that we're currently revising at the moment. But it gives you a flavour for sort of what we might be thinking about when we talk about education for sustainable development. Now, Again, I know this sort of comes up, conversations I've sort of had with people, that it's very easy to sort of think that education for sustainable development, well, that just means telling people about sustainability and that will lead to change. Well, that might be sort of the first level of education for sustainable development, but it's certainly not what it is all about. So that's a sort of a type one, and this is drawing together a number of people's different definitions. It is much more than that than just knowledge of sustainability. It's about trying to enable positive contributions and actions to sustainability, but also ensuring sort of critical questioning, embracing uncertainty, and realizing that actually it's important that people aren't just trained to do the right thing, but are trained to be able to critically think about different alternatives. And then some of the writers in this field will also go on and say it's more than that. It's actually about fundamental systems change in what we do and how our education systems operate, and the principles of sustainability being actually adopted throughout the whole that learning process. So, key point, it's not just telling people about sustainability. So another of the sort of key debates which runs sort of through the literature and the people working in the field of education for sustainable development is really sort of it should be all about systems change. And to be fair, the most people who write or who write a lot aren't really the people who are doing it at universities, and so much more of the writing is about sort of systems change. But I was fortunate. I had a great PhD student that I worked with, and really sort of looked at, well, let's sort of look at our current, imperfect educational systems and neoliberalism, marketization, and actually let's try and understand the contradictions and the synergies with the sustainability agenda. And so actually that's kind of really underpinned the approach that we've taken, the people I've worked with, in terms of actually really trying to take much more of a pragmatist approach within the system to drive change. And again, we can have debates about that later. But it's also important that we don't just sort of look at education for sustainability as being about done through the formal curriculum, the work that students do for credit. It's also about the opportunities that we provide for our students, the co-curriculum, but also the hidden or subliminal curriculum, which is what we all learn from the environment in which we study in, we live in, we work in as well. So we can think about those different sort of ways in which education takes place. And then really sort of, I suppose, my argument throughout is that universities have a particular responsibility for sustainability. And globally, there's a lot of students. So there's a lot of opportunity to have a bad impact, but also a positive impact. But as important is the fact that actually our future leaders are at university now. Sometimes that prospect scares me. But within our global university system, they are our future leaders. So this is our opportunity to give our future leaders a sustainability lens to take into their future work, to make more sustainable decisions throughout their future lives. There's another reason why I would also argue that universities have a particular responsibility, and that's that all of our students, well, most of our students, will earn more. They're more likely to be in employment, they're more likely to earn more than non-graduates. And that's why a lot of students will come to university. But actually one of the factors which is most closely sort of governs someone's environmental impact is how much you earn. So the fact that our students come to university, they will earn more, actually means that they will have a higher environmental impact as well. So actually as universities, we need to appreciate that and put even more work into this area. And indeed, if you look globally, then just 10% of the wealthiest in the world are responsible for 50% of global carbon emissions. So, much as we want our students to do well, they will have more impact as a result. We have more impact. We are those 10 most wealthy. Okay, so that's a bit about the sort of background sort of area of education for sustainable development and what I've been sitting in rooms sort of putting my hand up going sustainability for the past sort of 10 years or so. Where did I all start in this? And this sort of came about as a very young, naive lecturer in physical geography, reading sort of student exam answers, student essays, and I remember reading comments like, humans are too insignificant to affect global climate. And these are geography students. And I'd like to think that none of our students would write this now. This was back in 2005. But actually, it really started me sort of questioning, well, what are we doing as educators if our geography students are saying things like that? And that led me to apply for a small bit of funding to do a bit of research looking at whether sort of discipline area affected students' sort of environmental sort of perceptions. And that got me working, sort of introduced me to this field of education for sustainable development and people doing educational research, really sort of welcoming community, and also working with social scientists as well, a human geography colleague at the time. These are some results from some of those surveys, but actually really quite worrying. A third of our first years basically saying that they're sick of being told about climate change. Significant number of students saying, again, these I think probably largely geography, environmental students saying there is so much controversy about climate change, you can't be sure your actions will help. Again, it really started to get me to think about our responsibility as educators, but also our students' responsibilities. And so our students were also sort of saying that they felt they had a responsibility for educating others, but actually were we helping them to do that? And it also got me thinking really about sort of, well, what can we do to also try and develop agency in our students so they don't feel so disempowered as well? Okay. So, that's sort of where I was, sort of my starting point for why this really, it was a key turning point in my career to address these responsibilities. So the next thing I want to sort of look at is really thinking about what can universities do, and look at some sort of examples. How can universities address these responsibilities? Well, the first thing to say is it's not actually necessarily all thinking about what happens, within our institution directly. And again, completely by accident, I ended up with some funding to do some climate change awareness work with the general public, funded by DEFRA. Bear in mind, this was 2006, and DEFRA at the time were very much, don't tell people what to do, all we want to do is raise awareness about climate change. So actually, I think we've come a long way from just 2006. Anyway, so some of what universities can do is working with external groups, schools, school teachers, the public, sort of that transfer of knowledge. And actually, that, again, slightly accidental bit of funding led to running an environmental education group with one of my colleagues in the corner here for about 9 years, sort of carrying on doing that work. And that sort of comes to where I will end up, and I feel in some ways some of the work has come full circle. But I just want now to really go on to look a bit about different ways of embedding sustainability. And we're starting off by looking at embedding sustainability in the curriculum, so how we might sort of normally think about doing this. And back in 2007, I was really keen to try and sort of develop something within the university that any student could do. So I developed a module called Greening Business, Employability and Sustainability. Lots of buzzwords, well received in terms of the paperwork chain. And this was a module designed to sort of show that sustainability was relevant to all of our students because it was targeted around looking at sustainability in businesses, and all of our students are going to go and work, and sustainability is relevant to all businesses. And we used the university campus as a sort of an example of a greening business, and students, and this module still runs, students there take part in projects which are designed to sort of drive sort of ideas around sustainability improvements. And it was very much, it gives students a bit of a taste of sort of real world sort of learning as well, but within the confines of the university. And it does have impact. So just a couple of quotes coming out of this module. So one student was saying that I wasn't interested in sustainability at all before starting this module, and suddenly now I love it. And then this other quote is probably the reason that I still do the job, is one student saying, I didn't believe as an individual I could make a difference, but now I know I can. And how powerful is that really through one module, for students to feel that they can actually make a difference. And that led in 2009 to, and this was post-recession, so the government was thinking, how can we put, we've got all these unemployed, underemployed graduates, we need to get them into work. And we received funding to train up graduates to take on sustainability placements in a whole range of different businesses and organisations. And in the end, that placed at least 180 graduates in sustainability placements, them getting experience, but also the businesses, the organisations getting support to drive their work too. And then, always sort of tinkering in what I do, and sort of taken those ideas really just in this last year to think about, well, can we do this more within our sort of core modules? So we now have a sustainability consultancy module where our third-year students work with real people on real things that they want doing. And I had two groups of students this year, one working with the university, one working with a local group who are here tonight, so good to see you, to help them in their climate emergency work. So again, I think universities can do a lot in terms of linking our students back in with organisations, providing that extra resource, and there's lots of sort of win-wins there. Another way of addressing sustainability in the curriculum is to just run a sustainability degree. So students specialise in the field of sustainability. And we've got one of the longest running sustainability degrees here at Keele. I remember designing it with colleagues, sat in the pub. It's the best creative way to do curriculum design. We're in a sort of really privileged position in designing that degree, that we could think about what did we want the output to be at the end of the sausage factory. And that we were really looking to try and create graduates who could cross that traditional natural social science divide. And so we sort of created this highly interdisciplinary degree, bringing together 11 different disciplines across 3 sort of faculties within the university. And obviously, I love all of my students equally. However, this cohort of environment and sustainability students, one thing that really sort of strikes me is that they're incredibly highly motivated, and actually have also been really important in terms of catalysing sustainability activity within the university. And so many people in the education for sustainable development world sort of critique the idea of sustainability degrees. They say, it doesn't get enough people. But actually, these degrees do more than that through the students who come together and are actually really empowered to create change. And that sort of brings me to thinking about embedding sustainability in the co-curriculum. And an example of that is 4 of our students, very early days, sat in the pub, where all the best conversations clearly happen, and they were sort of bemoaning the fact they didn't feel they could live as sustainably as they wanted to in university accommodation. And they lobbied the university to take one of the small sort of properties on campus and turn it into an exemplar of sustainable student living. And that's a project, again, which has been running ever since. So it's partly sort of, it's empowering students by sort of supporting them in these ideas. And through these sorts of projects, students learn so much more about how to enact change. They learn about lobbying, persuasion, negotiation. They also, they're spaces where students can fail as well. And that's where real learning can take place, but is very difficult to create within the formal curriculum. But that project itself catalysed other projects and really sort of led to some other students deciding that they couldn't access organic veg on campus, and so they set up their own campus-wide organic veg box scheme, and that indirectly led to the development of a plastic-free shop within the Students' Union. And so, we need to think about spaces within our universities as places to be a sandpit for our students to explore ways to make change and empowering them to really sort of think that they can make change in other parts of their life. And it isn't just about sort of that practice and driving change in, very much sort of integrating these sort of practice projects with sort of research and education work as well. So in the introduction, Mark sort of mentioned in 2012, I got given the role of Director of Education for Sustainability, and with that responsibility for embedding sustainability in the curriculum, and when I wrote the job description, wider student experience, which is pretty much everything else. And one of the things that we sort of did sort of early on in those days, and I also had a small team to work with me, was thinking about, well, what are we working with at Keele in terms of staff and student perceptions? And this was back in 2013, I think. And actually even then, our staff were actually really quite sort of, up for embedding sustainability more in what they do. But feeling that the infrastructure sort of wasn't necessarily there to support them. And we also looked at what our students, this was research done in 2015, what they were sort of thinking about sustainability and how relevant they thought it was to their discipline. And we sort of subdivided that into broad fields, and we found arts and humanities students didn't really see what they were doing as relevant, which is hugely worrying because the arts and humanities is so important in terms of the narratives and the stories, which is actually how we learn and create change. Health students saw the relevance of sustainability, but not environmental side of sustainability. And when you think about the impact of the NHS in terms of environmental terms, it's quite worrying that health students don't see that. Natural science students see the relevance of sustainability, but don't really see what it is. And social science students there, and there's probably a much higher number of students engaged in the curriculum in areas around sustainability, and having quite a different sort of perception. But as part of this sort of trying to embed sustainability within the university, it's not just enough for people like me to talk about sustainability. We need discipline experts to be embedding these issues in what they teach. And we're now at a stage where we reckon at least 96% of our modules embed sustainability, driven by the discipline experts. But of course, another way of thinking about embedding sustainability is actually to think about the skills that are necessary. And I was fortunate to get some funding a few years ago from HEFGE to look at the area of listening, and actually spend a couple of years really sort of thinking about ways to develop listening skills, and listening being really important in terms of interdisciplinary working, having respect for other people, but also ensuring that we're hearing the often unheard voices as well. So this brings me to the sort of final element around that sort of ways to embed sustainability and thinking about the hidden curriculum, the environment in which we live, work and study. And clearly universities do have a major impact. It's environmental impact, social impact in the things that we do. But actually, there are also ways that universities and the university estate can be used in really positive ways as a test bed to trial new solutions, new ways of doing things with real people at scale. And this is often referred to as a living lab. So we can test on that sort of live, real scale. But also there are opportunities there for embedding research, for embedding educational opportunities, for linking with business as well. And I'm very, very sort of proud to be part of a big project at Kiel, our Smart Energy Network demonstrator, really designed around this idea of a living lab. And using the campus to trial smart energy technologies, to integrate different energy vectors, to work out how we can get different energy vectors to work together. And that's sort of underpinned by a really significant renewable generation project, which is going to be installed this year, which may see up to about 80% of our electricity generated on site. But that project is with a delivery partner in Siemens, but also really integrated into businesses in terms of the research, innovation, but also trying to develop a supply chain around smart energy solutions. We also have another really quite groundbreaking project on campus, the High Deploy project. So we're part of a wider consortium within this project, but we are currently the first UK trial of blending hydrogen into the gas grid as a way to decarbonise heat. So we had lots of focus on electricity in the past. Heat's kind of been ignored. We need to find a way to decarbonise that. And hydrogen might be a potential. So we're blending up to 20% hydrogen in our gas network here. And that's about a stepping stone in terms of a much broader transition and trying to create the evidence base to see whether we can roll out a blended hydrogen supply nationwide. But this also gives us another opportunity in terms of, we have the first people in the UK who are actually having hydrogen in their homes. So let's actually learn a bit about the consumer experience about hydrogen and how people sort of react to the idea of having hydrogen as part of their gas supply. So that's a project I've been leading with a number of colleagues at Kiel and elsewhere. And underpinning sort of a lot of this work is sort of a new development now that the Institute for Sustainable Futures, which we launched in 2018, as a way to encourage and sort of try and nudge more research with a sustainability focus. But a really key element being that it's around interdisciplinary research, because all of these sustainability challenges, they don't just need sort of one discipline to work on it. We need different disciplines to be working together and to have respect for each other and to be sharing sort of knowledge in order to really tackle these challenges. So what next, I suppose, is the question. We're here in 2020. Things are feeling very, very different. And there's some really interesting sort of projects which are being funded out there. So we're very fortunate to be part of a big UKRI project called Zero Carbon Rugeley. And this is looking at turning the town of Rugeley, not so far away from here, into a smart local energy system. And so the project is to design this smart local energy system. But the really exciting thing is that this project isn't about engineers coming up with engineering solutions and then realizing that they don't work for people who don't think like engineers. This is based around user-centric design. And we're spending the first year of this project really trying to understand the users, to feed that into our designs, but also equally, possibly more important, capacity building within our engineers and designers so that they start to design in a different way with the user at the centre. And it's all very well sort of working on those sort of projects elsewhere, but we can't neglect what's happening in the university itself. And so we declared a climate emergency as a university in May of last year with a target of carbon neutrality by 2030. And we need to start doing something around that. And so there's also, I know within the next few years of my career, a lot of working in Rugeley, but also working at the local level and trying to drive with sort of great colleagues in the States this work forward. But also, using our knowledge, our understanding, our work from the Smart Energy Network demonstrator, which will go into Rugeley, but also into other projects, and working with local councils as well to help them develop the skills and that confidence to really take on their own carbon neutrality agendas as well. So it feels, very, very different times now, with this language that's been used around a climate emergency. And if we think about, just Kiel, yes, I have been here all of my adult life, I now realise. And actually, I'm proud to have been here and seen how it's developed. And, and some great colleagues that had the privilege to work with right across the university, across the broader sustainability agenda. But it isn't enough for a small team of sustainability people to find the solutions, to make the change that we need. It is all our collective responsibility. And really that, I think, is the thing I would like people to walk away from this lecture with, is really thinking about our own responsibility in driving towards a more sustainable future. And my favourite quote of the moment: "The science demands it, the evidence is before you, we must start at once, there is no time to lose." And with that, I would just like to say thank you all for coming along today. Some specific thank yous to various key people in my career, to Education for Sustainable Development teams, past and present, to all of my Kiel colleagues, past and present, and in the school I'm currently in, and beyond the school as well. And for me, working beyond the school is as important as the school. Sorry, Chris. All of my colleagues in estates, catering, procurement, conferencing, and I love the part of my role which allows me to interact with people right across the university, all of my collaborators in various places, and of course at the core of it, thank you to all of my friends and families, and just say I do actually do some work. You see? Thank you.